Hi, welcome to Lil Unfiltered. Today I'm going to talk about the IRS and some of the truths that they don't want you to fully understand. And first off, I'm going to offer a disclaimer that I'm not a CPA, I'm not a tax expert, I've never worked for the IRS, I am not an attorney. You'd need to consult professionals if you need more information about that. But I had questions and I looked some things up, and I'm going to share what I've learned. And one of those questions is because I've heard it debated so often, and the question is whether it is actually a law to file taxes or it's optional. It's a written law, and I'll share what I found out. And please leave in the comments below whether you believe it's a law or you believe it's optional. Okay? And if you're an expert and or an attorney or a CPA or a tax attorney or something, please let me know in the comments. Okay? So let's get into it. So first off, why does the IRS keep us in the dark? Why is it so hard to understand the system that takes our money yet gives us so little clarity in return? Why do so many Americans believe there's no law requiring them to pay income tax, right? Why do millions think filing is voluntary? And why does this confusion never seem to go away decade after decade? Today, I'm going to pull back the curtain on the IRS, where it came from, how it operates, and why it's designed to keep you confused, afraid, and compliant. So first off, the IRS wasn't always here. For much of U.S. history, there was no permanent income tax. The first one appeared in 1862 during the Civil War, a temporary measure that funded the Union Army. And that expired and came back in brief versions, then vanished again. The Bureau of Internal Revenue was created that same year in 1862, and the modern IRS took shape after the 16th Amendment in 1913, which gave Congress the power to levy permanent income tax. From that point on, the federal government had a constant, renewable stream of revenue, and the IRS was reorganized into the collection machine that we know today. So, is filing taxes a legal requirement? Here's where confusion and conspiracy collide. So yes, under the Title 26 of the U.S. Code, the IRS Code, most U.S. citizens and residents earning above a certain threshold are legally required to file. Failure to do so can bring civil penalties and, in some cases, criminal charges for tax evasion. But because the law isn't written in plain English, people go searching for a line that says you must pay income tax and can't find it. That gap between expectation and reality fuels the myth that no such law exists. So let's spell it out. The three sections that actually make income tax law real. 26 U.S.C. Number 1, imposition of tax. This is the law that creates the income tax itself. It says there is a tax on the taxable income of every individual, estate, and trust. It also outlines the basic rate tables, single, married, head of household, and so on. In plain language, yes, the federal government imposes a tax on income. 26 U.S.C. 61, gross income defined. This section defines what counts as income. It says gross income means all income from whatever source derived, including wages, salaries, business profits, rents, dividends, and interest. It's deliberately broad. Everything you earn is income unless another law specifically excludes it. So in plain language, everything you make counts unless the code says otherwise. 26 U.S.C. number 6012, persons required to make returns. This part tells you who must actually file, and it says that every individual whose income exceeds the exemption amount shall make a return. In plain language, if you make enough money, you're required to file. Putting it together. First, number 1 imposes the tax, 61 defines income, and 6012 requires you to file if you meet the threshold. That's the entire legal chain. Not optional, not hidden, just buried in bureaucratic complexities. And that complexity is exactly what keeps people in the dark. So where the myth began, back in the 1970s through the 1990s, the tax protest movement exploded. Figures like Irwin Schiff and later Larkin Rose claimed income tax was unconstitutional, illegal, or optional. They shouted, "Show me the law. It's voluntary compliance. The IRS is just a corporation." It sounded bold, rebellious, and liberating. And it sold a lot of books and seminar tickets. But every single argument was struck down in court. The law exists, is just written in legal spaghetti that most people can't decipher. So, why it's so complicated? The U.S. tax code runs over 70,000 pages once you include the rulings, regulations, and case law. Instead of simplifying, Congress keeps layering on credits, deductions, and carve-outs for special interests. Big corporations hire armies of accountants to find every loophole. Ordinary taxpayers drown in confusion, and IRS employees aren't allowed to volunteer information unless you ask. So ask. Their job isn't to help, it's to collect. And the harder it is for you to understand, the safer the system is for them. So, the power of words, voluntary compliance. Here's the phrase that caused 50 years of chaos. The IRS says our tax system is based on voluntary compliance. To most people, voluntary means optional, right? But in IRS language, it means you fill it out yourself instead of the government doing it for you. That's it. Nothing voluntary about paying, only about the method of reporting. Yet that single word has fueled decades of misunderstanding and defiance. The IRS versus the government. The IRS isn't an independent branch. It's a bureau under the Department of Treasury, tasked solely with collecting revenue. It can freeze accounts, garnish wages, and seize assets. Yet it's not designed to serve you. Confusion and fear aren't accidents. They're tools of compliance. A complicated system keeps citizens afraid to question it. Abatements and hidden relief. Few taxpayers know that the IRS offers penalty abatements. That's ways to reduce or remove fines. First-time penalty abatement, clean record for 3 years, you can get penalties waived. Reasonable cause abatement, illness, disaster, or other hardship. Relief is possible, but they'll never tell you unless you ask. You must cite the rules and request it. Again, the burden's on the taxpayer, not the system. Undocumented immigrants and taxes. Millions of undocumented immigrants pay taxes through ITINs. Okay, that's individual taxpayer identification numbers. They contribute billions each year in payroll and sales taxes, yet they're excluded from nearly all federal benefits, Social Security, Medicare, even stimulus checks. In other words, they pay into a system they'll never fully benefit from. Their contributions quietly subsidize everyone else's. Distrust and rebellion. The IRS is one of the most feared and disliked agencies in America. Decades of secrecy and intimidation have earned it that reputation. Combine that with a government that has lied, misused funds, and protected the powerful, and people start looking for any explanation that makes emotional sense. Believing it's not really a law becomes a form of psychological protest. It's a way to reclaim power in a system that feels rigged. The corporation theory. Another persistent myth says the IRS or the United States itself is a private corporation. That misreads old corporate filings and maritime law theories. Courts have rejected it every time, but it sounds plausible to people already distrustful. And the truth is, they're not wrong to feel betrayed. They're wrong about why. Confusion as a weapon. Many European countries send citizens pre-filled tax forms. You just confirm or correct and sign, and you're done. But in America, companies like TurboTax will spend millions lobbying to keep it complicated, and the IRS plays along because confusion ensures compliance, and compliance brings cash. So who benefits from the confusion? Not you. The wealthy, because they can afford loopholes. Corporations, they shape the code. Tax prep companies, they profit off complexity. And the IRS, it grows stronger through fear. The losers, ordinary working people who file, pay, and pray they did it right. So the reality behind the myth, yes, the income tax law exists, but the confusion around it is intentional. That's the real control mechanism. When laws are unreadable, ignorance becomes obedience. And that's exactly how the system likes it. And it also can ensure basically that if you make a mistake or you don't understand fully, you can get fined, and that brings in more income for them. So what can you do? Learn about the credits and abatements. They exist, but you must dig for them and ask questions. Use the taxpayer advocate service when the IRS blocks or mistreats you. Push for a simpler, transparent tax code. And most importantly, never sign blindly. Knowledge is resistance. Understanding is power. The IRS was built to collect, not to help. It keeps you in the dark because confusion benefits them and the people at the top. But the more you know, the less they control. So the next time you file, don't just comply out of fear. Ask, challenge, demand clarity. Because if you don't, no one else will. Again, let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching.